These three pitch decks have amassed over 20 million views and are basically the reference that thousands of founders have been using for years. And these are great decks, but you should not copy them unless you understand why they work and the context on when they were used. So in this video, I'm gonna tear them down, study their structure, and show you what we extracted from them to build a framework to tell company stories. The first, and by far my favorite deck on this list, is Airbnb. The company didn't publish the slides. We have them because someone at Business Insider, who was in Y Combinator demo day back in 2009, took photos, and then the internet took care of putting together a deck based on the photos. The crucial context you need here is that this is a demo day deck, which means that it was designed for someone to present it. It doesn't have descriptions on the slides because the CEO was expected to narrate it, and it was made to be pitched within the time limit of 3 to 4 minutes, which is usual for demo days. That means that the pitch deck that got them funded definitely had more slides than we got to see. This is also a seed stage deck. The company had raised a little bit of money, bootstrapped for a little bit, and had a working product. So let's arrange the slides in our pitch deck framework. You'll see that overall we follow a typical structure going from status quo to the product to market to the why us section. Now we're missing an ask section and we're missing traction numbers, which would normally go in the market section. But understandably, this company probably didn't want to disclose those publicly at demo day. Now, some highlights on the problem solution combo is that the problem and the solution slides are almost like mirrors of themselves, which I actually love. Notice how in the problem slide, every statement is clear, it's clean, and undebatable. If you go with problems that are more like opinions, and those opinions are not shared by the viewer or the reader or the investor, you might just lose their attention right away. If you're using numbers, adding the source is a good idea to confirm to the reader that this is not just your opinion, but that isn't always possible, of course. Now compare that to the solution slide. Notice how each of the three statements basically answers one of the problems that we posed in the previous slide, almost like they're mirrors of each other. Again, we call that part the problem-solution combination, and it's really one of the hardest parts to nail on any deck. Now moving on, we have market validation, which I consider an optional slide, but in this case, it's quite crucial. Since the idea of staying at a stranger's home was kind of new, it was important to highlight that people were actually willing to do it. To a rich venture capitalist, crushing a sofa with couch surfing might have been disgusting, but this is undebatable proof that something similar to Airbnb was already happening. Now coming up to the market slide, this is probably the slide that I would have changed the most. Let me explain why. First, we still haven't been told how the company makes money, so it's hard to grasp TAM, or total addressable market. Also, to me, the market size slide should go in the market section after we're told how the company makes money, because the TAM slide should answer the question of how big the company is gonna get. So ideally, we should have done some math that would look something like this. Maybe in part because they didn't show revenue per trip, or maybe because they didn't have the number figured out yet. This TAM slide doesn't estimate the dollar value of the market, just the number of trips. So they did a TAM, SAM, SUM approach, and they did this top-down estimation, assuming that they would capture 20% of their serviceable addressable market. Saying that you'll take 20% of the market is a bit arbitrary. So it's much better to do a bottom-up approach, using a well-founded number of users as a base, and again, multiplying that by your average revenue per customer. This market slide was so off, interestingly, that Airbnb did about 448 million trips in 2023, almost all of the serviceable market that they mentioned. In other words, that number was pretty close, but the 20% carve-out was totally unnecessary. Next, there's a product slide, which again feels a little lost because we've just been talking about the market. I would assume that these product screenshots were animated on screen, but I guess we'll never know. Going down to the business model, the simple answer, we take a 10% commission on each transaction. Only that, I think, would have made for a great slide, even showing what the average commission is based on the average trip size. What the founders did here is run a few projections to understand where the company could be in terms of revenue, which normally you would do in the financial forecasts slide. But remember that this is a public demo day pitch deck. This market adoption slide, I feel, is also a compromise that they made in the interest of making a short demo day deck. What they're doing here is essentially merging two slides. They're merging the traction slide and the go-to-market slide. Notice how it touches on their traction with the partnerships they've made, and it touches on their marketing strategy. So with this slide, what they showed is that they understood how to get customers, they understood how to build partnerships, and more crucially, that they were more clever than the competition. This section on the right refers to the hack or bot that they built, where every Airbnb listing got automatically published to Craigslist. This hack essentially hijacked Craigslist to get them to market, which obviously worked. Now, a go-to-market slide should not be just a list of marketing tactics. Instead, it should be exactly this, just bragging about the stuff that you're already doing, the stuff that's gonna carry you to the next fundable milestone. A pretty standard 2-axis chart for competitors, and for secret sauce, competitive advantages. And finally, this is Airbnb's deck against our framework. Overall, notice that it has pretty standard structure. I'll get back to this chart as we go through the next couple of decks. Oh, by the way, I wasn't a fan of the design. Granted, this is a 2009 deck, so we made a nicer version that you can use as a template on Slidebean. I also asked my design team to do a full-on redesign, which you can also download as a reference below. Next up, let's look at Uber's pitch deck. Again, a real deck from the company that they used to raise their first money in 2008, in this case shared by one of their co-founders in a Medium post. The first thing I'll say about this is that this is a long deck. There are a couple of slides here that I would just completely remove, but the clear context that you need here is that this is an email deck, where each slide is supposed to be self-explanatory. So the team actually does 2 problem slides, which are actually very solid on their content part. I would change a few things on the design, but I'm gonna show you the original version first. What I love about this content is that it's such an obvious pain point that we were all experiencing. They just observed it and proposed a solution. Sometimes the best problems are just hidden in plain sight. 2 slides for the solution, that's perfectly fine. They both focus on the abstract concept of what they did, right? Without getting into the details about how it's actually gonna work. I would have avoided so many bullets and maybe I would have tried a more visual approach, maybe something like this. Notice how I use the title of the slide as an extra bullet, and by breaking the content into 3 columns, it makes it seem more readable and it saves me a slide. By the way, the number of slides is not as critical as people think. It's more about the time that it takes to consume the deck than the number of slides. Next up, features. I think the key differentiator slide is solid, though images could have made this slide a bit easier to read. Same with operating principles, some of which they didn't seem to follow as closely as they let on. Anyway, I felt environmental benefits was a bit of an overkill slide, maybe because we already have 2 feature slides, but especially because we are already at slide 7 into the deck, and we still don't know how the product looks. But funny enough, we don't get a glimpse of the product at all in this pitch deck. There just wasn't a product. This was just an idea back then. It's different times, certainly. In this day and age, unless you're a founder with some exits under your belt, I think it's really hard to raise money just on the idea. Investors expect, at the very least, an assembled team that has started developing some product concepts. The idea for Uber is very well elaborated in this deck, but even so, in 2024, this would probably be a red flag. Use cases is a great slide, and I think a critical one. Remember that this product didn't exist, so some extra context was necessary to prove that this is something that people would actually use at some point. The user benefit slide feels redundant against features, so I would have definitely compressed those. Now notice how so far, we're 15 slides in and still in the product section of the deck. And this is what I mean when I meant that the deck is running a little long. Though the most crucial slides in this whole section, aside from the problem/solution combo, are probably these 2, the technology. Sadly for all of us, the idea for surge pricing probably derived from this slide. Now, we have 3 slides for TAM, which is a bit too much. And the first one is the most crucial one, which is painting a picture of the taxi and the limo service market and how it's growing and how it's fragmented. And while their market is in smartphones, the whole premise of this product was the rise of smartphones and just giving everybody a GPS. So it's perfectly valid to have a slide about that. Now, I don't see potential outcomes slides very often, but they're usually quite insightful. In this case, they were actually very realistic about their worst case scenario and what the company could become if they failed. But funny enough, their best case scenario was $1 billion in annual revenue. They did $37 billion in gross bookings and $9.9 billion in revenue in 2023. But I'm sure if they would have put that on a slide, people would have called them crazy. Now, the go-to-market section is probably the best in this deck. It's straight, it's to the point, and with a clear roadmap of target cities and the logic behind why they're targeting those cities. They were very realistic about their very early marketing ideas because, again, the purpose of this round was mostly to build a product in a pre-iPhone world, mind you. Please don't use this traction progress to date slide as a reference on your pitch decks, because you can probably do all of these things in a day using today's technology, so it's nothing worth bragging about, especially provisional patents, which we have a whole video about those. No team, no budget, no financial slides, no ask, but there's a good chance that these slides existed and they were just edited out to make the deck public. And that's your Uber pitch deck, following a great story arc, almost on par with the framework. And here's a link to the template that you can use to build a deck of your own, following the exact same structure using our AI builder. I also asked our design team to do a full redesign of it, which I'll also link below as a reference. Now, the last deck I'll reference today is from a B2B SaaS company, and it's a Series A deck, which are much harder to find online these days. This one was shared by Mathilde Colleen, the CEO of Front, for their $10 million Series A round, and it's generally a fantastic deck. Completely opposite to Uber's pitch deck, which had 13 slides about the product, this deck has just 2. This and this. That's it. Notice once again how the problem is clear, it's straightforward, 2 sentences backed by some data and reinforced by some visuals. That's all you really need. The solution again almost answers these questions and explains the product in the abstract, a multi-channel email client. The only other slide on the product section is this roadmap slide. That's That's it. There are no more screenshots, demos, nothing. Now, this may sound super counterproductive, but at Series A stage, investors care less about the product itself and significantly more about traction. 7 out of the 20 slides in this deck are just about metrics, a whole third of the deck. It starts with simple traction, drop in brand names, customer satisfaction, MRR growth. Look at the beauty of that chart with that 5.4x year-on-year growth in subscriptions. Churn rate, an incredibly healthy churn rate below 5%, and a net negative MRR churn rate. We have a whole video about SaaS metrics if you want to understand what I just said. They even shared a cohort table of customer retention and net negative MRR growth. I almost have envy at this point with such insane metrics. And their go-to-market slide is another favorite. In so few words, they are able to describe their core channels, but more crucially, they proved how well they understand them and how well they track them. Capital efficient, solid, but realistic projections, including not just revenues, but the team scaling. More than a solid deck, you're looking at a truly fundable Series A business. But the lesson you all should take from this deck is that at this point, metrics speak more than product screenshots. Series A decks are metrics decks by all means. Now, if you want to learn what happens after you send your pitch deck, we made a whole video about that. Also, remember our team's available to do anything from redesigning your slides to reviewing your pitch deck to actually writing your pitch deck from scratch. Happy to help. We'll see you in the next one.